What's up, guys? NTG Hipster here, and my friend here has a Dimir mill deck. I had a comment asking for one, so I guess he's going to go ahead and do a tech of his deck here.
Alright, so to start off, I'm going to show you my layout of land. What I do is mostly because I run blue spells, I have more islands than swamps. So I typically run 11 islands, and then I run 9 swamps. And for an added bonus, you can run Dimir Guild Gates, which can be effective sometimes if you can get them out early so that they can untap. And then, after you do your land, we're going to talk about spells. One spell, a 1-drop, Tome Scour. It's very effective if you get it out in an early hand. Usually you want to mulligan a couple times so you can have one at least in your hand. And it's pretty effective. It's a 1-drop to mill 5. And then you've already milled 5. And I recommend a playset of Tome Scour. And it's a very effective card. After that is another 1-drop, Jace's Phantasm. Jace's Phantasm, for every 10 cards in your, or just for 10 cards in your opponent's graveyard, it's a flying and it gains +4/+4 for being a 1/1 if there's 10 cards in your opponent's graveyard. So it's pretty effective flying, and it's kind of hard to get rid of after you've put 10 cards in their graveyard. After that, we get to the 2-drops. One of them is Essence Scatter. Typically, I run 2. It's to keep the low spells and creatures level down so that you can have consistency with a 60-card deck. Essence Scatter allows you to counter target creature spell, so you can counter any creature that comes out onto the battlefield. Pretty effective if someone has an Aetherling and you have it in your hand, because Aetherling's pretty hard to get rid of. Second 2-drop, Breaking and Entering. I don't run red land, so I typically just use Breaking, which allows me to mill 8. And it's pretty effective, and I usually run about 3 of those. So don't run a playset so that you don't fill up your deck so high. Then 2-drop creatures. Fogbank is a very effective defender. It's a defender, and it can defend against flying and ground, and it prevents all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by Fogbank. So even if a creature has Death Touch, this creature cannot die. The only way you can get rid of it is if you have a spell put on it, or it's countered before it's even put out. So it's a pretty effective defender. And I typically run about 2 of those. I have 2 right here. Next, I run 2-drop White of Precinct 6. It gains +1/+1 for each creature in your opponent's graveyard. So it starts out as a 1/1, so it'll just gain +1/+1 every time a creature goes into your opponent's graveyard. Another card I run, I'm probably going to take out because it's going out of standard, is Invisible Stalker. It's a pretty good card. It's unblockable and hexproof, and it's pretty effective if, as a defender. That's why I mostly run it. I used to run Ciphers, but I found them to take up too much space, and you don't really get them that often. So it kind of just slowed me down. So I mostly use them as just a defender or a waste card. And then we get into the 3-drops. One of the best 3-drops that I have, I run a playset of, Psychic Strike. It's a 3-drop, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 colorless, and you counter any target spell, and the controller has to mill 2 after you cast it. So it's a pretty easy counter plus mill card. It's very effective. Some people don't like it very much because of it's overpowered because it can mill and counter. So it's a pretty fun card to mess with people with, but it's also very effective. for a mill deck. 3-drop creatures. Phantom Warrior. This is like the standard version now, the in-standard version of Invisible Stalker without the hexproof. It is unblockable. It's kind of effective if you can get him out. I only run one, so I don't know his effectiveness, so results may vary depending on how many you put in your deck. The next one is Nightveil Spectre. It's a 3-drop for either blue or black. It's a flying, and whenever Nightveil Spectre deals combat damage to your opponent, that player exiles the top card of their library, and you can use that card as long as you can pay its mana cost. You can also put out their mana if it's different colored mana than what you're using, so that you can use any of their cards that you exile this thing with. And if you exile their cards, then you can use them, and it's pretty effective if you can get their lands so you can use their spells. And then we get into the 4-drops. Typically I want to run 4, but I only run 3 right now. Diabolic Tutor. It's pretty effective to get out any creature that you want from your library, and you put it in your hand. So it's pretty effective to get out those creatures that you really want out on the field that will help you a lot, which mostly is the higher drop creatures that I run, is mostly what I get this out for. So it's a pretty effective card for a mill deck, so it helps speed up a little bit. Next 4-drop creature, Cryptghast. I run because it has Extort, and then it also all swamps tap for 2. So you pretty much double your land mass whenever you put out Cryptghast. It's pretty effective for... it takes a while to get it out, but it's pretty effective after that with just having extra mana on the field. And it's a pretty effective card. I don't usually attack with it just to keep it out on the field to get mana out. And then I also run 1 Clone. Clone's a pretty effective card if you need to have a second of one of your bigger creatures, or if they have a big creature out, then it's pretty effective to use their own creature against them. I don't use this card very much. Sometimes it's in my sideboard, but it's a pretty effective card if you want to have a good amount of creatures out on the field. Then we get into the 5-drops. Any Dimir mill guy will tell you that Jace Memory Adept is an effective planeswalker to have for a mill deck. For his 0, you can just zeroing him, they have to mill 10. His +1, draw 2 cards, or draw a card, and then they discard a card, and they put it in the graveyard. And then if you're able to get him up and -7, any target has to draw 20 cards. So it's easy to get them to discard cards if they have cards you need to get rid of. So they have to get rid of at least most of their hand. So it's pretty effective to get them to run out of cards. But mostly 0 is mostly what you want to do for a mill deck. Next 5-drop is Mirko Vosk. I run 2 of these. It's flying, and whenever it deals combat damage, you have to mill until you find 4 lands. So if you're able to get it out and swing with him, then it's pretty effective for a mill if they have to dig deep until they find 4 lands. So it's a pretty effective card to get them to mill pretty harshly. Another good card for the Dimir mill deck is Consuming Aberration. Mine's a foily. It's a pretty good card. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in every opponent's graveyard. So if you're running, or if you're playing a multiplayer game, then it's going to be a pretty high number if you're able to mill them out. So, And then its secondary is whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. So it's pretty effective, mostly because it gets a high toughness rate, and then every time you cast a spell, they have to mill. So it's a pretty good mill card. The next 5-drop is Jace's Mindseeker. Whenever he's flying and whenever he gets out on the field, they have to automatically mill 5. And then you can use any instant or sorcery to... you can cast any instant or sorcery card from their discard pile that they just did without paying its mana cost. So it's pretty effective to use their own cards against them. And then it's flying for a 4/4, so it's a pretty good Air Force card. It's typically good to run a good Air Force amount of creatures, flying creatures in a Dimir mill, so that they can't really defend very well. And then you get into the bigger cards. This is a 7-drop, Ward of the Void. It's flying, and the whenever it deals combat damage, the player exiles the top 7 cards of that player's library, then puts a creature card from among them under your control, so you can use their own creatures against you. So it's a pretty effective card to... it takes a while to get out, but if you can have Crypt Ghast out on the field, it's pretty easy because it doesn't take as much land, and all of it taps for 2 with Crypt Ghast, so you can have this card out on the field if it's in your first hand pretty soon after that, putting Crypt Ghast out if you can get enough land. That's why it's good to run a good amount of land in your Dimir Mill deck. Another card I choose to run just for personal preference is Rise of the Dark Realms. It puts all creatures from every graveyard under the even my own back onto the field under my control. So it's a pretty good card to have in a mill deck because you're going to be milling a lot and they're going to have a lot of creatures in their graveyard, so you can use their own creatures against them. So it's a pretty good card to have on a sideboard or put into your main deck for main use. All in all, it's kind of a solid deck. It's pretty consistent, and I seem to have no problem with it. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns, then don't hesitate to message MTG Hipster. And this has been the Dimir Mill deck.